Welcome to the Meat and Potatoes podcast, a Silicon Slopes production. Meat and Potatoes shines a light on the people in Silicon Slopes who get things done. We explore how, why, and when they get those things done and why their work is the meat and potatoes of Utah's tech and business community. Today we're joined by Kelsey Chase, who's the co-founder and president of Aumni. How are you?
Doing well, Garrett. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. Working from the home office, it looks like.
I am today. Yeah, I am. And if you hear any screams in the background, it's probably my 13-month-old.
Uh-oh.
I just heard her a second ago, so I wanted to give you a caution.
Yeah, that's all part of it now these days. You can have all sorts of fun and cool sounds in the background. Let's start with you telling our listeners what Aumni is.
Sure. So Aumni is an automated investment analytics platform for venture capital. And I can get in a bit more to the product and exactly what we do, but it probably helps to understand, at least to share my background and my co-founder's background. So prior to co-founding Aumni, I was a corporate attorney. I spent some years at some really top law firms on the West Coast. Started my career at Wilson Sonsini, which is, of course, one of the top tech corporate law firms working with startups, and then also worked at DLA Piper, which is a much larger international law firm. And so through the years I spent at the firm, I worked closely with many entrepreneurs and served as an outside counsel to a number of venture-backed companies at all stages of development across various verticals and industries. And then, really at DLA, did a lot more work with the investors. And so worked with institutional funds. I worked with corporate venture funds, high net worth individuals, family offices, and working with the investors just served as their outside counsel. So it was primarily their lead deal attorney when they were making investments and doing private offerings. So yeah, really corporate legal background, and just working in the tech space, had a lot of venture-backed clients and worked with a lot of venture funds. And so I cut my teeth and really gained a lot of expertise just doing venture capital transactions and various types of private offerings. So it was through that experience. And my co-founder, Tony, comes from a corporate legal background. Tony worked at Latham & Watkins, one of the premier corporate law firms, and then also worked at Wilson Sonsini, which is where he and I met. Tony's also spent some time in the back office of a fund. So I think it was through our collective experience in this space, in the ecosystem, that we just realized some pain points in the industry, working closely with investors. And what we do, I think, and for the listeners, many of them have probably gone through a venture fundraise in some capacity, whether they're entrepreneurs or investors or just tangentially as service providers, whatever it may be. These transactions are complex. It's not atypical for hundreds of hours of legal time, kind of business principal time, founder time, hundreds of hours going into negotiating and structuring these transactions. And so the final product of these deals is a PDF closing set that typically is 300 to 500 pages long. So very complex, dense legal agreements. And what Tony and I realized was the most of the industry did not have a lot of visibility into this data. I mean, these deals are rich in with lots of information and data. And so circling back to Aumni, what we do at our core as an automated investment analytics platform is we focus all of our energy on these complex legal agreements. So we go into these documents and we pull out hundreds of legal, financial, and economic data points that are the key drivers to these transactions. And then we've built a web-based application that houses all this information, and we've got some fairly sophisticated reporting and analytical tools that allow funds to track these investments and analyze and understand data in their portfolio in an unparalleled way. So automated investment analytics, and we're currently selling to venture capital investors, but also we do work with sort of outside of your institutional funds, like some great local funds here, and just give a shout out to Kickstart and Mercado. Those are two funds we know very well. In addition to the institutional funds, we do work with emerging managers, corporate venture funds, family offices, high net worth individuals, all the types of people that have investments into private companies. So that's really our customer base, and the product that we're we're building and scaling today. And yeah, maybe I'll stop there, Garrett.
Yeah. Yeah, I do have in a previous life a little bit of experience working at a venture fund and then a fund of funds as well. And until the day I die, I'll always question why things are so complex, and it took a lot of the fun out of it, to say the least. And you had the background and years of experience. Did you ever just wonder, does it really need to be this way? And forecasting it out, let's say 100 years, are those PDF final documents going to be 5,000 pages long? Because I assume they didn't used to be that long back in the good old days.
Yeah, that's a good question. Luckily, well, I think fortunately for the industry, much of these transactions have been fairly standardized on the National Venture Capital Association model legal documents. So they tend to follow a fairly standardized format. And just, I think tying it back to our company, another update about what we do, we raised our Series A in December. So fortunately raised it at really good time. I think raised it on great terms, took in a lot of capital. That was a round was led by Silicon Valley Bank, and we're still taking in the final dollars, but it will, it's rounding out to a $12 million round. SVB took the majority of that. We had some of our existing seed institutions, Next Frontier Capital out of Montana, Moneta Ventures out of the Folsom area in California, and then brought some new institutions in at the Series A, including Kickstart and Mercado, a fund out of Colorado called Blackhorn Ventures. So had some really great investors come together in that round. And I think back to your question, the hundreds of VC deals I did as a lawyer, I've never seen a deal go from term sheet to final docs as fast as we did. So it's a nice thing about having corporate lawyers as the founders kind of driving the transaction. So yeah, I think there are plenty of opportunities for efficiencies in the deal making process, and that's certainly an element of our application. I think really a couple of value propositions that we can bring to the table for VCs is around some of those operational efficiencies, specifically around legal processes. But I think more importantly is just visibility and access to all this data. Really never as a fund been able to, in any sort of repeatable or scalable way, go into their portfolio. And we do work with some legacy Sand Hill Road funds, some really large funds with large portfolios, working with some top incubators and accelerators with high volume portfolios. And to understand, for example, do I have major investor rights in my portfolio? Where do they lie? That is a really complicated question. Often will involve someone with legal expertise. Sometimes this is the CFO or VP of finance at a fund asked to answer that question. But what you can do with a few keystrokes on Aumni is get the answer to that question across the entire portfolio, dating back to legacy funds from 6 years ago. So it's that sort of granularity into the legal rights that we unlock for funds, and some recent examples that I think prove the value of what we're doing and just the need for it. I think as the market started shifting a couple of months ago, we were getting feedback from our investors and our customers that funds all over the country are starting to do bottoms up reviews of their portfolio. So really trying to look at all their companies, which companies need capital, who are the lead investors in those companies, what are my legal rights in this company? If I want to fund this company or I want information to even assess whether this company needs capital, what are my information rights with respect to a company? That was, we started hearing these conversations from our customers, and what we did through the Aumni application was push a suggested view into their dashboard. And basically it puts forth all of the key legal, economic, and investor rights that would be important as you're assessing a portfolio and going through those types of questions. So got some really good feedback. I think some of our funds, including some CFOs, sang our praises on LinkedIn. So there were some really good feedback that we got through that process. And that's one example. Another example is the SBA and PPP topics that were pretty hot a few weeks ago. So another area that it is just a very, very in-depth and complicated, what it ends up is it's a complicated legal analysis. And so what we couldn't do is answer the question, are venture funds affiliated to their companies? That is a legal analysis that is done by a lawyer. But what we were able to do that our customers found a lot of value in was we could bring in the salient legal and economic data points that are necessary for even doing that analysis. So quickly a fund could look across the entire portfolio and see, what is my economic ownership? What is my voting ownership in the company? Do I have control on the board? Information about the operational covenants that a company is signed up to. So there's just been some recent examples where funds need access to this data, and for our customers, it's really keystrokes that we were able to unlock that for them.
Yeah. So if it wasn't in the managing partner's brain, they'd probably have to spend a lot of time going back through emails and documents and all of that. So with your automated process, it probably saves hundreds, if not thousands of hours over a year, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's right. And it's kind of interesting. I'm sure many businesses and companies, even yours, leading up to, and we can talk about the move out to Utah, but leading up to our Aumni's move out to Utah, we were pretty much a fully distributed and remote team. So we were able to transition back to that fairly seamlessly, but just that dynamic has been interesting. So really what was table stakes 6 months ago, a web-based application, cloud-based data, accessed by multiple users, that was not even part of the value proposition that we would pitch 6 months ago, because it was just table stakes for any technology. But I think in financial services in particular, when their teams go fully remote, like what we're seeing in customers and funds that we're pitching to, is it just exposes the information silos, really does. And I think it's, we work in financial services, but I think this is true. A lot of companies are learning that communication and access to information just becomes key in a remote world, because you can't just walk down the hallway and talk to your CFO or your general counsel. So even that dynamic's been really valuable for us, as we give just funds a central place. So it's not in the general partner's head. It's not in the CFO's head. There's central access to all this information.
Yeah. So you're a high-powered corporate attorney, and the idea at some point struck you. Did you kind of build it moonlighting, or did you just take the dive in the deep end of the pool?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've always had an entrepreneurial bug, and I think college, even reluctantly going to law school, I sort of always had in my mind that I was not going to practice law forever. Law school was interesting. I got an amazing opportunity with Wilson, and at the time it was, I believe that it was the most active IPO period in the last 20 years, something like that. And so it was a time where the corporate law firms just had overflowing amounts of work. I had this awesome opportunity to go work for one of the top tech corporate law firms, and kind of jumped on it. And I'm thankful for that experience and working at DLA, because I just got thousands and thousands of reps and hours becoming an expert in corporate deal making. So the experience was extremely valuable, but I think I always had the entrepreneurial itch. And even as promising and I think rewarding as a career in corporate law can be, it's a career, it's hard work, but there are a lot of perks. The pay is nice. It was a stable career path for me, but lucky enough to have some mentors along the way. And I just felt like it was the right inflection point in my life. Hadn't built up a lot of expenses or reliance on the good pay that comes along with being a lawyer. Had a young family, and just felt like it was the right time to make a move. And so, yeah, Tony and we launched the venture together, left our stable jobs as lawyers, and found a really awesome angel investor that backed our initial idea. So yeah, we left those jobs, kind of had some planning to it, but left them pretty quickly, jumped into the startup, and really bootstrapped it for the first year, and then launched it in the beginning of 2018. The end of 2018, we were able to get enough traction to raise a seed round. And so I think that was really where we started getting some momentum and traction, was at the end of 2018. But first year was bootstrapping, and just a lot of hard work and grinding to prove concept and convince people that what we were doing was a good idea.
Yeah. So along those lines of convincing people, how did you get your first customer? And who was it?
Yeah, so we had a core group of four really early adopters, early customers, and I'll highlight the one that was the first actual mover, and it was just a colorful story. But this was No Name Ventures out of LA, seed fund. The GPs there, Taylor and Chris, and so the idea, I think at the time, I think many entrepreneurs in the software space can relate to this. Tony and I also don't have technical backgrounds, so we were able to scratch together some PDF mock-ups of the product that we wanted to build. And it was pretty low fidelity, but at least the idea was communicated, and through some singing and dancing, I think Tony and I were able to convey the idea. And I'll never forget that distinctly in the meeting in Santa Monica, we're meeting with the No Name Ventures team, kind of put up the product, took them through the pitch, and asked the question, if we build this, would you buy it? And I think the response was awesome, but the response was 1000% yes. So that was some great validation from an early adopter. And that was, we had some other early customers, Zeno Ventures, Prologis Ventures, but that meeting with No Name, I think really just stands out in my mind, as that was the first really strong validation that, yeah, guys, go do this and build it and go raise some money, whatever you need to do to get going on this as soon as possible.
Cool. So you and Tony don't have a technical background. How did you guys, one, build your team, and then two, kind of divide up the responsibilities of a small startup?
Sure. Yeah, the first year it was Tony, myself, Cody, who's another JD, had some early employees, and we were fortunate enough this summer of 2018, so the first summer of the company, we got introduced to our now CTO, Rob Wise. And Rob is just a phenomenal individual, one of the smartest and most intelligent people I've ever worked with, and just perfectly suited for this role in this company. And so, quick background on Rob: he was, prior to becoming a senior engineer and a coder, was pursuing the finance career in New York. So was into investment banking and kind of headed down that path just to stay in finance, and just found a knack and a real interest in coding. And that started his spin-off as an engineer. And so, yeah, we were fortunate enough to meet Rob early. And Rob, when we met him, was just a really senior engineer. The early days of building the product were long weeks where Rob was really just downloading my brain and Tony's brain. And, these are 50-hour weeks where Rob and I are just locked in a room, and Socratic method, he's asking questions. We're building the initial entity relational diagram to figure out what the database is going to look like, how it's going to function. And so, yeah, the product today has all of Rob's fingerprints all over it. I mean, he's designed, and he was the initial architect behind it, but what we have now is a really sophisticated database. And so the early days was really Rob, and he's now got a team of 10 plus engineers that, for the broader audience, we are very much out looking for great talent in the market. So I think because we raised our round last year, looking to invest with some, and continue expanding the team. But Rob's got an awesome team now with some amazing local engineers. Got a few folks that work remotely outside of Utah, but the technical component of our business very much lies with Rob.
Very cool. And did you enjoy that part of, technically helping build it, or were you out looking for new customers?
Through that period, Tony very much was out there selling, and I was locked in a room with Rob. So yeah, I really enjoyed that iteration phase with Rob. I continue to just learn tons of things and information from Rob from a technical standpoint. So in addition to just him being a great coder, his work is amazing. He's also a great teacher. And I think that's why his team really looks up to him and likes working with him. He's just great at teaching. And I now joke with him that he could teach an MBA level course on venture capital. That's how well he understands the space. Yeah. So yeah, Tony and I, and then, since then, really Tony and I have been the two salesmen winning our early base of customers.
Cool. And so what prompted you guys to move to Utah?
So there's a couple reasons. I think some of them are probably the obvious ones, like great quality of life, a booming technology scene, an amazing place for young families, both of which Tony and I have. Tony's got 2 young kids. I currently got 1 young kid. And so we were, at the time, I mentioned we were a remote team, distributed. Most of the team was on the West Coast. So we had people in Southern California, which is where I came from. Prior to moving to Utah, I was in San Diego, and Tony was in Northern California. And so most of the team was out there operating. And I think towards the impetus really started hitting us towards the end of 2018, which was the first year of the company, when we really started getting some traction and momentum. We got some great advisors around the company, and Tony and I just firmly believed that we had an amazing opportunity sitting in front of us. And the best way to capitalize and give ourselves the best chance to succeed was to locate the team in a central office and have that innovation and collaboration. And I think mainly it was following Tony's belief that that was key to our success. And I think he was completely right about that, about locating the team and just having that innovation and collaboration, some things that just can't be really replicated in a remote world. So that was the idea. We're going to take our distributed, it was a smaller team at the time, but we're going to locate everyone and we're going to grow in a central location. So once that decision was made, I think we did map out a couple possible cities and locations. I think the Bay Area would have been an obvious choice and option for a company like ours. But we wanted to think outside of the box a little bit and looked elsewhere. So Salt Lake Tony and I both had connections to Utah, had friends and family. So it was always at the top of our list, but also kind of quickly looked at Colorado and some other markets outside of California. And I think once you map all of the things that are important to young founders with a family trying to grow a tech business, Utah it wasn't even really close when you kind of map everything out.
Yeah.
So, and that's before we even get to the operational advantages of Utah and just being able to run a fundamentally sound business, a tech business with great business fundamentals out of a place like Utah. So before you even get to the business reasons, which are valid and I think stand alone as on their own merit to locate and grow a company in Utah, it was some of the other softer factors that just really Salt Lake and the Utah tech scene just kind of rose above, from our perspective at least.
Yeah. So, every entrepreneur, when they're getting ready to do their venture, they've got, their total addressable market, and is it big enough, and is there enough money to be made? So have you been surprised at how big your market is of, folks and funds and institutional investors that can use your product, or did you already know it was that big before you jumped in?
It's a really good question. I'm going to plug a quote that Tony often says on our fundraising roadshows, but we'll give investors a lot of good reasons not to invest in Aumni, but lack of opportunity is not one of them. And so I think it really comes from Tony's and my understanding of the private capital ecosystem and financial services, and just understanding the inroads and how big this sort of entire ecosystem is. And so venture capital is really our beachhead. We have a ton of work to do within the venture capital and start an ecosystem, and have a lot of exciting things on our roadmap to do there. But really, when you think about how much broader that network is, so when you look even at a typical institutional fund structure, they have very influential and powerful limited partners behind their funds. And those can include family offices, high net worth individuals, large institutions, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, all of whom have interests in and want to understand more data about this market and this ecosystem. So I think as we paint the larger picture for Aumni, there are new market opportunities that would span outside of venture capital that we're interested in pursuing. I think still have a lot of work to do with our core product today. We will be working, primarily working with the investor side of the table right now but also we have a lot of interest from actually the legal community to design a product for them. And so, it makes a lot of sense that the GPs, in-house counsels, and CFOs at funds really value our product, but there are also outside counsels to a lot of venture funds and investors and companies. And so, for us, we are starting to see some traction in the law firm world, working and have some great conversations going with some top law firms about designing a product and an experience for them, really from the perspective of the outside counsel to the venture-backed companies.
Yeah. So venture capital was your beachhead. Is there a difference in the complexity and how you monetize it with a sovereign wealth fund or a big old archaic private equity fund?
Yeah, I think the pain points are different. The paradigm is the same. I mean, across the entire industry, you've got complex legal agreements documenting investment activity is like what it comes down to. And that you could go as far as even looking at real estate deals, for example. I don't know that, that's an opportunity we're aware of, but, just an example of how deep this pain point lives outside of just really venture and startup. So yeah, I think as you look at other groups, just staying within financial services, so other fund types, traditional private equity, there are obviously different investment approaches, ways that they think about their portfolio and fundraising. So I think the product and the pain point would be a bit different, but really I know there's a lot of really a lot of contracts, complex legal agreements, even driving that space. So I think we have plans as to what we could do with private equity funds, but just a easy distinction is venture funds are taking minority positions in companies. And even, I think it's evident, or just illustrating of how connected this industry is, but as you get further upstream in venture capital, growth funds start to look a heck of a lot like private equity funds as you get further and further upstream. And so we do already work with some growth funds just with our core product, but have plans to land and expand and scale the product and technology into other verticals and other fund types.
Yeah, there's a lot of money out there, and there's a lot of people that have made money in thousands of different ways. It's always intriguing to learn how people have made their money. I don't know this off the top of my head, but you might. What venture fund, let's just say in America, has the most portfolio companies dating back 30, 40, 50 years? Do you know?
Well, I guess it depends on what we mean by venture fund. We have some great discussions going with Techstars. So that has one of the largest portfolios known to man. I think they've got, we had Nicole from Techstars on one of our webinars, and I think she said 2,100 companies in their portfolio. Some of the top Sandhill institutions we work with that go back, they're legacy funds that go back to the 80s and 90s. They have a couple hundred in the portfolio. So those are considered large portfolios and lots of money under management, but probably Techstars would be my guess at having the largest number of companies and therefore probably the biggest network.
Yeah, crazy. How did you guys come up with your monetization strategy?
Yeah, the business model is really just focused on the number of companies in a portfolio currently, and we've got some. Even now, the technology is advancing. There's more value we can drive for funds. So there's other ways we think we can monetize the information. But I think that is the core thesis of our monetization strategy: is what can we do with this data? We've identified sort of an initial buyer of the data, the venture funds, and it's really thinking about how can we further monetize this information for other stakeholders in the ecosystem. So that's, I think, starting with venture funds, these are organizations that back innovators and entrepreneurs. So I think that helped us a lot as we had a lot of early adopters look at the technology, wanting to support us and see us succeed. And so that helped us win some customers and get traction. But yeah, now we're currently selling a monthly subscription to the funds. That's how we monetize it right now. And some of the other opportunities are just, I think, other ideas that we have around how we could further monetize this and other information.
Yeah. So everyone's always interested in, pre-COVID, how people managed their time and energy and lives. So I guess tie in your current, COVID life and pre-COVID. How do you manage your time and your team and your well-being? What are some of the tricks and tools you use?
Yeah, it's a good question. Something I've been giving a lot of thought to lately, as it relates to kind of business and professional life, for entrepreneurs, especially for growing enterprise SaaS companies. Some of that's fairly easy. I think most days the best and most important thing Tony and I can be doing is selling and evangelizing Omni and selling the product. So that does help with time management. We're just trying to focus our energy on our sales funnel and be a part of the key meetings and initiatives that are going to help grow our company and give us more customers. But working from home and having a young family, which I know many people do right now, which requires, I think, more assistance at home, have just tried to be deliberate about about organizing time. So for me, it's being really thoughtful about my days. I think just getting advice from other successful entrepreneurs. I try to be mindful at the beginning of every day to focus on some of the top things I'm working on. And then now I try to loop into that, like some family goals too for the day, because the worlds are now intermixed working from home. But it's really trying to focus on the needs of the company and just being thoughtful at the beginning of every day. What are my most important things I could be focused on from a professional and family standpoint?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little bit trickier, in my opinion, these days. So you guys were in a unique position versus, other first-time entrepreneurs. Most often, they're kind of confused with the whole term sheet and cap table and legal process, and a lot of times they get burnt, and there's a long list of horror stories. But you guys had that part squared away. So, how did you guys go about your fundraising process? And what were some of the high points?
Yeah, and happy to discuss that. I will say this is one of the items on our company roadmap that we just think we can be tremendously valuable as companies and investors are either raising money or investing in companies. So behind our database, what we endeavor to do is to bring real powerful market analytics into our application. So this will allow investors and companies to really understand the dynamics of the market when they're doing deals, which traditionally the market insights really come from the service providers, specifically the legal community. These are lawyers that have typically an active list of deals, and so they're very aware of how the market is shaping in terms of just anecdotes from recent transactions they've done. But what we can do for entrepreneurs and investors is bring real market analytics. So, from looking at your valuation at your stage, which typical investors will invest in the company at that round, what are the terms, how much of the company am I looking to give up, what is the size of the option pool, are these participating preferred rights that this investor is asking me to sign up to, what is the commonality of that in the market right now? All those types of questions that start at the term sheet level. These are key legal and economic rights that are negotiated early on. But today there is no market data-driven answer to those types of questions. So I would just say, just a plug for our company, that's part of our vision, is we want to bring more data, more insights into the deal making, and are already doing that with our existing customers. But for our own fundraise, we've done a seed round, we did an A round. And this is Tony's and my first run, so I'm just speaking as someone that's only been through a seed and an A round as an entrepreneur. I've certainly done a lot of deals as outside counsel, but the seed stage was very much proof of concept, visionary. I think getting people excited about what we were planning to do, and really the team, the co-founding unit between Tony and I. Are we the right two people to go unlock this opportunity? The A round was I think still some of that selling the vision, pitching the vision, convincing investors that this was the right team to do it. But really, it was having a lot more of a defined plan. And I think at that point, what we had seen just from a company perspective was going from zero revenue at the beginning of 2019, a product that was just hitting the market with our first few customers in the beginning of the year, going from zero revenue to having some really amazing growth in 2019. So had a 1 full year of strong traction, great referrals from our customers, people saying good things about our application. It was all that sort of momentum coming together. We also happened to be at the end of last year, a really strong cash position too. So it was a function of, growth, momentum, excitement in the industry, coupled with the fact that we didn't need to raise. It's like the old adage, when you need to raise money, it's really hard and you're not going to like the terms. When you don't need to raise money, it's easier and you tend to get better terms. So we had a lot of that working for us, and it ended up being a fairly competitive process. We were speaking with a number of institutions, but for us, the Series A was not a deal that Tony and I had set out to go raise money. It was really, we just so happened to be talking with investors, the types of people that fund companies like ours every day. Tony and I talk with 15 to 20 funds a week. So we have investors constantly switching the hat from a customer to an investor and asking us questions about our company. And I think that really just culminated at the end of last year, speaking with some great institutions and them really getting introduced to them from a customer standpoint, but them putting the investor hat on and really pushing us to our next fundraising plans. And then, some of that, the momentum starts to build. Now you've got a competitive process. And Silicon Valley Bank, I think when Tony and I really started getting to know that team better, they just emerged and I think really stole the transaction and just were the clear lead investor from Tony's and my standpoint. And we've got some awesome partnership discussions and collaboration discussions going with SVB. But obviously the extent that they're connected in the startup venture and private capital ecosystem was one of the main drivers. And then the people, we had our director from Silicon Valley Bank, Eric Pena, was the deal lead. And Tony and I just really liked the way his mind worked and how he was thinking about our business opportunity. So yeah, for us, it was circumstantially just had some good things going for us. Ended up being a competitive process. And yeah, we just decided to pull the trigger and raise the round in December. And in hindsight, it was good to raise a round, a really healthy round of capital. And we're just now sitting in a position of strength, I think, to be very strategic and opportunistic about where we're investing and how we're growing.
Yeah, to say the least, that was good timing. I could keep asking you a billion questions, but your time is valuable, so we'll probably wrap it up. But what are your goals for your company and your team over the next year or so?
Yeah, that's a good question. How I would respond to that, I would focus on, I think, some company specific goals that a lot of software companies share. So we are very much targeting growth among our core product. So working with more funds, advancing and maturing the application. But really for us, it's trying to prove out some of our hypotheses about these new market opportunities. And I mentioned we have some real traction with some of these other opportunities, but my goal is to continue to grow the company and start to drive value in other segments of the market. And I think coupled with that is continuing to invest and just harnessing an awesome team. We do have a really phenomenal team, and that's been one of the downsides that I think a lot of growing startups can probably relate to. Is we had all this momentum coming off of a fundraise in the beginning of the year, had our team co-located in the office, and there's just a lot of good collaboration going there. And so my goal is to maintain that excitement, that energy among the team, keep our engineering team really excited and amped on the opportunity, the sales team, and then all the lawyers that we have at the company. So it's continuing to harness a great company and culture, which I think we've been doing a really good job of, and just trying to tackle some of these bigger opportunities that we're eyeballing for the next 12 months.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what you guys are building is very cool and impressive. You know, I wish I was a VC now, because like I said at the beginning, a lot of what you guys are solving is not very fun, at least in my opinion, and it takes the fun out of it. You know, the fun part is, you know, interacting with entrepreneurs and seeing their vision and making decisions. And what you guys have created sounds like it's taking care of the not so fun part and making everything more efficient and allowing them to do their jobs better. So congrats on that. And
Yeah.
yeah, appreciate your time hopping on this podcast today, and look forward to your guys' continued success. Be good to have you on again in a year and a half, and get an update from you.
Yeah, that sounds awesome, Garrett. And yeah, I hear you with tying back to your experience in the VC world. But certainly, if you know any today, send them our way. We'd love to talk to them.
Absolutely. Cool. Again, that's Kelsey Chase, is the co-founder and president of Aumni. Appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.